this past week at our Tuesday morning meeting at the Theology Cafe, Panera just down the street here, we discussed C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce. The premise behind this book is to deal with a 17th century notion that somehow the damned receive an occasional repose from the torments of hell. The thought being that those who once rejected God in this life would somehow see their brief respite as a second chance to experience God in the next. I have to admit, I find that notion appealing. However, the only scriptural reference that comes to my mind that discusses the idea of our crossing over between heaven and hell is found in chapter 16 of Luke's gospel account, where Lazarus and the rich man find themselves at opposite sides of this great chasm, only to hear Abraham say that the chasm exists so that those who are in hell cannot get to heaven, and those in heaven cannot comfort those in hell. Anyway, C.S. Lewis begins by describing the life of several characters who reside in hell, and then their sojourns in heaven. When the choice is given to them to stay in heaven or return to hell, character after character chooses to return to the familiar, rejecting what is freely offered because it does not match their perception of reality. Only one continues this journey, and through his eyes we get a glimpse of heaven and what it is like, and the willingness of God to receive those who were once lost. And this led to even further discussion at our table about our perception of what heaven is like and those we will meet one day when we too walk with the saints. And in light of our upcoming celebration this weekend of All Saints' Day, I found our discussion really interesting and relevant. Then later in the week, I ran across an article by the Reverend Nora Tisdale, the homiletics professor at Yale Divinity School, about those places or times in our lives when we have been given a glimpse of heaven. And here's what she said that caught my attention. On the coast of Scotland and Ireland, there are certain sites that the locals call thin places. Thin places are so named not because they are any higher in altitude or that the air is any thinner. Rather, they are called thin because it is believed that in these places, the distance between heaven and hell shrinks. And the veil between the two worlds is thin. It's so thin that you can actually perceive something of heaven itself. She went on to say the ancient Celts, seeing the deep spirituality of these sites, built many of their worship places there. Some still marked today by circles of stone. Later, Christians also built churches and monasteries and cemeteries there. And people who visit those sites today sometimes say they lose all track of time and space while there. And they know deep inside they are on holy ground. For in the thin places, the boundaries of time and space fade away. There is no yesterday, no today, no tomorrow. Only eternity stretching forth in a timeless continuum. All this got me to thinking, where are the thin places in our lives? Where or through whom do we or have we sensed the divine? And how has that influenced our perception of what or who awaits us in heaven? For most of Christendom, one of those thin places we all share is the altar. Not as a memorial of the stone upon which Jesus was laid, but as a living memory of the night he gathered together with his friends to share with them a life-giving meal that would somehow bring them together even after he was no longer physically present with them. Now, how that's possible has been a discussion within the church ever since the church was first formed. Words such as transubstantiation, consubstantiation, transubstitution have all been used to describe what is indescribable. The presence of Jesus among us at the altar when we gather around him. Historically, for Anglicans, the real presence of Jesus is found in the sacrament of Holy Communion. And while the bread and wine we use are the essential elements of that sacrament, they are not the only way we know Christ is with us. Think back to the disciples along the road to Emmaus when they stopped with their wandering leader there. They don't see Jesus in the bread and wine he uses, but they recognize him in the words and the actions he uses. That's why in chapter 11 of the first letter of Corinthians, Paul tells the people of Corinth the words and actions they should use when celebrating the Lord's Supper. Not to invoke Jesus as one might a pagan god, but to recognize Jesus already present among them. In Anglican theology, and according to our own catechism in the back of our prayer book, a sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. In the Eucharist, the outward and visible sign is the bread and wine we use. Bread and wine used in the context of the words and actions of the Eucharist. While the inward and spiritual grace we experience is that the body and blood of Christ becomes present among us. And when we realize that presence, then we, like the multitudes John describes in his book of Revelation, shout out with a loud voice, Amen. Now, if the same Jesus is here where we worship, is the same Jesus that is there and present when the multitudes worship in heaven, then we worship side by side with those who have gone before us and those who come after us, giving thanks and glory to our God with one unified voice. Therefore, on this day, we do not simply remember and celebrate all the saints, the martyrs, or family members who have gone before us. We meet them in the thin place in our midst. And we join with them in giving thanks and praise to the one true God who loves us so much that he pours out his Spirit upon us and adopts each of us as his own.